Welcome everybody. Just another 30 seconds or so, we'll get started. You're in the right spot if you're here to talk about the exciting topic of procurement benchmarking. We will have some time after our slide presentation for group participation. So that will be a great time for questions that come up for you while we're presenting our content. Today, we're focusing on procurement rules. So think climate action plans, purchasing guidelines, that kind of thing. So we're really hoping and looking forward to a robust discussion. So please, keep track of questions, comments, ponderings, feedback about impact areas. We're going to start in a bit here to give a background on the Empower Procurement program itself. And we'd love your feedback on the program impact areas and things you see in your everyday work. So again, be ready for discussion. We have a chat box that is open if you want to tag your questions there to be ready when we open up for discussion. But without further ado, allow me to introduce myself and my colleagues here who are hosting this webinar. It is the third in a series of fundamentals of benchmarking. Not to worry, it is standalone. As mentioned, today we'll be covering the rules having to do with Prospect Silicon Valley, and we are joined by Taylor Grossman.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Great. Yeah. So thank you, Taylor, especially because he is our run of show master. So again, please use the chat and be ready for questions and conversation. But without further ado, let's give a background on the Empower Procurement program. But before we dig in, here's our agenda. First of all, we'll introduce the program, then a review of benchmarking. And again, this is for especially beneficial for folks who haven't seen the previous two modules. That's okay. Today is standalone. But we'll give a brief review of what is procurement benchmarking. And our second installment had to do with the roles of people associated with procurement. Today, we're focusing on rules and then that ever popular time for conversation to round us out. Okay, so the Empower Procurement project. Again, welcome to our third module of benchmarking for carbon conscious purchasing. So the goal of this course is to help organizations benchmark their procurement processes to determine what's working, what's not working, how to achieve sustainability goals through purchasing. It might seem obvious that organizations should be tracking procurement given the vast amount of resources that it involves, but the reality is that organizations such as yours experience a gap between creating sustainable policies and tracking the impact of products and services you acquire to reach your energy efficiency goals. And that's where we want to help today and perhaps with you as a partner and enrolling. The presentation is the next installment of the Benchmarking 101 video, which is posted on the Empower Procurement website, empowerprocurement.com. During this module, we'll be building off of that content from our first video, as well as the ensuing video having to do with roles. to help lay the groundwork and understanding for the importance of benchmarking and ensure that benchmarking can help you achieve your desired purchasing outcomes. Future modules will work through, in the future module I mentioned on June 2nd, we'll work through the details of the right tools and resources to achieve measurable impact and identify repeatable methods for success. So let's dive in and get started. So Empower Procurement is a program led by Prospect Silicon Valley, I mentioned, and funded by the California Energy Commission. We help institutional organizations in California decarbonize purchasing streams through a variety of procurement initiatives. This course has been developed by Energy Solutions as part of the Benchmarking Procurement Initiative, peer-reviewed by Berkeley National Laboratory. And we want to recognize the other organizations in the Empower Procurement team, as you can see here. Okay, so why procurement? California, there's big dollars here. California's $3 trillion economy is on track to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2050. What we buy makes a difference. I repeat, what we buy makes a difference. So that's why procurement. So let's start with procurement as a whole. As shown on the right here, triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. As you probably know, based on experience, purchasing activities have a large impact on your organization's greenhouse gas emissions. However, if you deal with procurement at your organization, you also know that procurement is complicated. There are a lot of stakeholders involved, both within and without your organization, and a lot of diverse needs that need to be met. On top of just meeting your procurement needs, it can be difficult to determine which clean energy technologies to purchase, especially as they're emerging and changing so rapidly. So the recordings and live webinars in this particular course will focus on the benchmarking aspect of procurement. And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, benchmarking can help simplify operations and ensure you're making more strategic and carbon conscious purchases to help reach your sustainability goals. Okay, so as you can see the pie chart on the left, and as you know, based on experience, purchasing activities have a large impact on your greenhouse gas emissions. In this case, over half, 55%. There's many different touch points when it comes to procurement, from IT to facilities, et cetera. So one of the purposes of the Empower Procurement program, something that we wanted to get our arms around, which is, what's actually happening? How are things being purchased? So a key part of our program is conducting assessments with market actors like yourselves. That's why we want to save time for discussion during this module so that we can hear from you in case anything we mentioned today is of particular interest or you have suggestions for our project. So we can help with things like streamlining contracting, understanding best practices for identifying service professionals, and best practices to follow for products procurement. Our procurement initiatives are led by Berkeley National Lab, Energy Solutions, and a Z&E Alliance, and cover 6 main areas of focus for procurement. These include practices, contracts language, services, products, e-fleet management, and benchmarking. Now I want to open it up for and invite you to post in the chat any questions, comments about the program that have come up for you, and we'll hold them for discussion during our discussion time. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to my colleague Smitha so that we can dig into the main topic of today, which is benchmarking of procurement and the rules related to procurement. Smitha.
Thank you for that quick intro to Empower Procurement. Let's move on into understanding what benchmarking is, specifically in the context of carbon conscious purchasing. Okay, so why is benchmarking important? Benchmarking helps to evaluate and guide institutional decision making. But by implementing this process, your organization will be able to better understand the energy and greenhouse gas emissions implied by your purchasing decisions. So I'm going to say that again. Your organization will be able to better understand the energy and greenhouse gas emissions implied by your purchasing decisions. This leads to a wider adoption of clean technologies and green products, and ultimately reduces your organization's overall carbon impact. When implemented effectively, it can also reduce spending and revolutionize your entire procurement process. Tracking and measuring various attributes of your purchases will enable your organization to conduct analyses in 3 major ways. First, it's going to allow your organization to understand where exactly your spending is going. Can your organization be more efficient with certain purchases? Can you change the way you're purchasing? Can you change what you're purchasing in order to minimize your impacts? How can your organization save money on its key purchases? These are the type of questions benchmarking helps answer by helping you analyze specific attributes. For instance, money. You may even find that the sustainable purchasing options end up being the more cost-efficient options as well. Second, you can begin to track the greenhouse gas emissions of your purchases. If you have that information, you can minimize your company's environmental impacts by opting for products that are GHG emission conscious, energy efficient, and or sustainably sourced. By tracking the specific energy attributes and greenhouse gas emissions associated with your purchases, you can calculate exactly how much impact each of your procurement processes will have on the overall company carbon footprint. For example, I will know that opting for the greener version of product X might actually not give me any sort of significant savings as much as product Y will. So those types of decisions can be made if you are beginning to track the GHG emissions of your purchases. This is also an opportunity for your organization to address social impacts as well, though it's not the main point of this webinar series for certain. There's other social impacts that are worth tracking, like fair wages, labor, and even cruelty-free products, for example, products that don't test on animals. And so benchmarking will allow you to track other attributes as well. Finally, benchmarking ensures your organization is working to meet its sustainability goals defined by leadership. There are often goals written into your company's climate action plan that are listed but never tracked or even touched upon again. This will allow you to actually reference back to those goals and track projects and discuss them quantitatively. Overall, by measuring and tracking these different aspects, your organization can better understand areas for improvement and decide on which aspects you want to commit to changing. So within the procurement context, the key principle to benchmarking is that you can't manage what you don't measure. Benchmarking focuses on understanding how effective your procurement practices are in measuring the relevant environmental attributes so that you can ultimately manage them in ways that align with your own organization's goals. For example, reducing GHG emissions or lowering your energy bills. So the first step to addressing any procurement issues is assessing your own organization's current methods of measuring environmental attributes. Through this assessment, you'll be able to understand which product attributes your organizations should be tracking. Once you've decided which attributes you'd like to track, you can then commit to implementing those improvements. This is a key step because making those changes ultimately allow you to measure, track, and achieve your desired outcomes. It's also important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to achieving a successful benchmarking. We will cover common strategies and solutions, but the goal of this is to tailor this theory and framework into a way that meets your organization's specific needs. So now that you understand a little more about what benchmarking is, I'd like to apply it to some real world examples. Let's start with procurement costs. When making purchases related to your organization's operations, whether it's replacing an air conditioning unit or conducting a lighting retrofit, purchasing energy efficient equipment will help your organization save money on your energy bills each month. And it's going to continue to save your organization money over years. Energy efficient equipment often qualifies for rebates from utilities, which will save you cost up front. Also, high performing equipment requires less maintenance than lower performing equipment. For instance, LEDs, for example, are much more efficient and have a longer lifespan, so they don't need to be changed as frequently as CFLs. Having a system that can influence more energy efficient purchases will help your procurement costs overall. Okay, let's look at GHG emissions. If your organization manages a fleet of any kind, you might consider upgrading to a fleet of EVs, electric vehicles. This is going to reduce your overall GHG emissions, and your impact will continue to improve as California's grid becomes cleaner and cleaner. It's important that you take into account which of your purchases could impact GHG emissions, which is why benchmarking is a critical step in determining your highest impact purchases. Finally, energy attributes. After implementing a benchmarking system, you'll be able to compare different energy aspects of the products. For example, life cycle energy costs or energy efficiency. By considering these aspects during purchasing, you can make decisions to help your organization be more resilient to potential blackouts and weather events related to climate change. Great. So now let's talk about roles, rules, and tools as a method of implementing benchmarking. The roles, rules, and tools framework is a proven data collection and analysis method that guides all activities under the Empower Procurement Program. Derived from LBNL's work to provide the Department of Energy with insights to review and improve FEMP guidelines, RRT, or roles, rules, and tools, allows a full assessment of an organization's set processes, practices, goals, and barriers. In this and the following installment of this course, we will be looking at specific applications for each part of the framework in the context of benchmarking. So last month, we looked at roles. This month, we're looking at rules, and next month, we'll be looking at tools. So the following things are things that the RRT framework was designed to do: assess, identify, recommend, implement. Now that you've seen the roles, rules, and tools framework and how it kind of relates to benchmarking, I'm going to try to demonstrate each aspect. So first, we're going to talk about roles. When there is no one at your organization assigned to lead the benchmarking initiative, attempting to pursue any part of sustainable procurement becomes unorganized and inefficient. As aforementioned, it is critically important that someone at your organization has time embedded within their role specifically to plan, monitor, and assess your sustainable procurement processes. By doing so, they can focus on improving the various metrics your organization cares about and can streamline the process by ensuring that green purchases are approved by a single point person. Next, we're going to talk about rules. When there are no clear rules or goals at an organization that the organization can strive towards sustainable purchasing, it is deprioritized and results in purchases that are neither cost or energy efficient as possible. One potential solution for this would be creating formal rules, which is written rules defining specific sustainable procurement goals and measures. That way, the goals are defined and they are highlighted as an important piece moving towards your organization's greater goals. If your organization does not currently have a climate action plan, consider whether one will be developed soon, or if it makes more sense to incorporate sustainable procurement guidelines elsewhere. Finally, the last piece in our rules, and tools methodology is tools. Many procurement systems do not allow customers to pull any information specifically about sustainable purchases. To see this information on a current procurement systems, customers would need to basically download a plain text file of a year's worth of purchases and manually search and categorize certain products. Updating your platform can expedite this process with tagging features or options to flag green purchases. Not only will this save your company hours that could be then used to analyze the purchases, but it'll also allow you to track and quantify your sustainable purchasing progress. Before we get into today's topics of rules, I'm just going to quickly review rules. So it's a clean transition into how it relates to rules. There are three main challenges associated with rules. Number one, organizations don't always have the capacity or resources to prioritize sustainability when purchasing. For an individual whose responsibilities include evaluating costs and function, sustainability is often low on the list of priorities. Another major challenge is buy-in from critical roles, whether that's a procurement officer, management, or leadership. And finally, individuals responsible for procurement are sometimes in completely different departments and work entirely independent of each other. So somebody in ops might be buying one thing and IT might be buying something else, and they're not necessarily in communication with each other. So how do we overcome these challenges? To create a process that promotes sustainable procurement, an organization should appoint individuals to drive the effort and hold departments accountable. This can happen in one of two ways. One, a dedicated procurement staff. In this case, these individuals would form a sustainable procurement department. And the department's purpose would be to lead sustainability initiatives and hold other purchasing departments accountable. In fact, the savings achieved by this dedicated procurement staff may itself fund the existence of the department. The second option is a procurement task force. So another approach is to form a task force responsible for sustainable planning and procurement. This approach can be initiated in the near term if a procurement department is not yet feasible, or it could be a precursor if a procurement department or staff is a longer term goal. Cool, let's jump straight into the rules framework and talk about how it is going to lead to better sustainability purchasing. So at any organization, there exists two types of rules: formal rules and informal rules. Formal rules are officially documented, referenced, explicitly stated, versus informal rules are implicit rules that drive decisions but are not officially written. They're not explicitly stated. They exist underlying in any organization. Both of these rules inform one another and govern behavior of all employees. Let's dive into formal rules. So an agency's formal written rules pertain to facilities, technologies, and policies. Some examples of formal rules are executive orders, regulations, agency policies, internal directives pertaining to things like purchasing supplies, formatting reports, etc. These written rules tend to be easily referenced and are used to shape behavior in your job. So these are very accessible. I'm sure these are things that are circulated in your company that govern most and all official behavior. So rules in terms of pertaining to environmentally conscious purchasing. This is one excellent example of formal rules. This is a great thing, a great rubric to use if you are creating sustainable formal rules for the first time. I'm going to briefly skim over this particular case study in case anyone would like to model or create formal rules with this in mind. So in California, the Department of General Services Procurement Division serves as the lead agency for EPP by and for state government. State agencies should check DGS's Buying Green Guide Beyond this, much purchasing in California occurs out of state government that directly impacts overall state waste generation and market development. Thus, this program also explores the array of innovative programs and resources found elsewhere as well. So I encourage you all to take a look at this. It is available on their website. Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Guide continues on and outlines some specific considerations such as post-consumer recycled content, energy efficiency, durability, low or zero air emissions, low or zero hazardous substances, water efficiency, etc. So I encourage you all to take a look at this and see if you can pull anything from this policy that you can incorporate into your existing formal rules. So what are informal rules and how do they affect formal rules? By definition, informal rules are implicit rules that drive decisions, but again, are not explicitly stated or written anywhere. These rules are tacit knowledge about how things are done at an organization, and they dictate which formal rules have precedence in practice and what behaviors are expected or acceptable. One easy example of this is a certain manager in your organization's specific preferences or priorities. It's harder to identify informal rules because, as mentioned several times, they are not written or even stated anywhere. So let me give you an example of informal rules that might be a hypothetical scenario that might exist within your company. So Company X is opening a new office and is purchasing monitors, keyboards, and mouses. In the past, Company X has purchased mostly Dell laptops because the person responsible for purchasing has an established trust with the Dell sales representative. When purchasing monitors, keyboards, and mouses, Company X is more likely to continue purchasing through Dell than purchasing through a more sustainable vendor. This unspoken preference for a familiar and trusted vendor is an example of an informal rule. This is a scenario in which one of those, this is how it's always been done type of cultures is not necessarily serving your company's sustainability efforts. Formal and informal rules are always at play. These rules exist in your organization currently, whether or not they are discussed. So how can we use this existing framework, strengthen these two types of rules to work together and ultimately benefit your organization's sustainable purchasing efforts? So once formal rules have been instituted, they must continue to be amended and improved as necessary. And sometimes it's really only possible to see certain weaknesses in policy after it has been implemented. Elements of formal rules may be antiquated or no longer relevant, right? Like, an easy example right now is people are not going into work anymore. And so if there's a lengthy policy about, I don't know, things that exist in the workplace and the workplace only, like monitors or something that is exclusively in the office, that might not be relevant to your organization anymore. Rules that are commonly broken should be reevaluated. If there is a rule that you must report weekly on something and you find that employees are not, then rather than try to force them to follow a rule that's commonly broken, maybe it's time to reevaluate the rule and have a biweekly check-in or a monthly meeting check-in. Finally, following some procedures may directly contradict another procedure, right? Like one type of product might have a priority of efficiency while the other has a priority of cost. And so you cannot create a blanket statement that affects both products' procurement processes when they might end up directly contradicting each other. So let's see this in practice by looking at the energy management team at the San Diego Southwest region, Navy Regional Southwest in the San Diego area. So The energy management team needed to report energy use at all of its facilities per federal requirements. But the agency also wanted to provide dashboards in its own building lobbies and had a set schedule for installing electricity submeters in its buildings. One building has a large computer server load that dwarfs several of the other loads in the building. Noticing this oversight in the initial formal rules, the agency amended its rules and separated the server load from the total electricity consumption so that building managers and occupants could better see their energy usage on the dashboards and then see how their actions are associated to energy changes. And so I think this is a great example because this is an example of somebody amending its formal rules in terms of calculations in order to modify behavior, right? Because people are now seeing how their actions are directly affecting energy consumption in the overall building. Strengthening informal rules is very complicated and slightly nebulous, right? Because as mentioned many times, they are not documented or recorded. So in order to ensure that the formal rules are being adhered to, it's also necessary to examine what informal rules are at play. Talking to employees whose behavior will influence the ability to establish, maintain, or implement a targeted change in the planning stages can resolve problems and generate ideas for better pathways to change. So instead of an announce and defend tactic, companies should engage in participatory ways to meet goals. So what does this mean and how does this look in practice? Let's apply this to our previous hypothetical scenario. Company X is likely to purchase monitors, keyboards, and mouses from Dell because of a trusted relationship. Because this is an informal rule and not documented, purchasing managers at Company X may not even be aware that this is a preference because it's one of those, this is the way things are done cultures. To identify these issues, purchasing teams at Company X must frequently communicate through existing processes. Talking to employees whose behavior influences others helps shape the company culture. So I think what this is saying is communication across multi-departments will hold each other accountable and help identify informal rules and biases that are at play. So now that we know how to use the rule structure to help sustainable purchasing, I'd like to open up to discussion. Okay, so what are some informal rules at your organization? How do these informal rules affect the implementation of formal rules? Might be a little challenging to identify the informal rules, but I encourage everyone to dig a little deeper and see what you can come up with. And now is also a great time for, if you have any questions, to please type them into the chat. To raise your hand or to speak, to unmute yourself. I think you have to raise your hand on this platform. So
it does look like we have our first question.
Okay.
What are some means for providing teeth to formal rules?
This is a great way to go off of that formal versus informal rules pattern and framework, which would mean that any sort of official consequences would be some sort of formal rule. But what we want is for there to be a cultural expectation in the workplace to uphold certain values or standards or prioritize formal rules. So ideally, the way to provide teeth to formal rules is by cultivating a culture and cultivating informal rules that set that as the expectation. Okay, so we have, what are some methods for keeping rules fresh and front of mind? What are some strategies for, I think that's recurring reminders or incorporation into process documentation? Yeah, that's actually a really great segue into our next module, which is tools. So there are tools that will quite literally flag or notify you about greener purchasing options. And this is a great way to keep rules relevant. in a way that's different than the informal rules of it all. In addition to a cultural expectation in the workplace to uphold sustainability as a value, there are tools that will also keep sustainable procurement fresh in the mind.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, if I may, that it's important to, especially with large institutions, large buyers, it's important to bake in your rules to the fabric of your institution. You might have a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting where it would make sense to have, some time dedicated to discussing procurement, or even just reminding about rules, and baking in that regular reminder or that dedicated time, can keep it fresh, keep it front of mind, provide a ready-made platform for people to just think about procurement once a month. We do it, in day to day to manage projects, but sometimes just having that 5 minutes in your month to, check in about what's working, what's not working, that can build in, that time.
That's a good point.
We'd love to hear from you folks who attended. Thank you for those who are still here. If you have input on, what you've done that's worked or not worked, or of course your own questions, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you. Don't be shy. Or of course, type your questions into the chat box. Does anyone here have procurement in their job title? We'd love to hear from you. There are some unicorns out there. The rest of us just do it. Job title's different and we do procurement.
If there are no more questions, can we go to the next slide? So thank you all for attending. I'm just going to go over some key takeaways here, and that's that there are two types of rules that govern behavior at any organization. Formal rules, which are rules that are officially documented and referenced, and informal rules, which are implicit rules, implied rules that drive decisions, but are often not stated. These two rules inform each other and directly affect procurement decisions. The way to utilize these is to constantly amend and reevaluate both formal and informal rules to be aiding each other and helping in the efforts to purchase more sustainable. Thank you all again for attending. Please join us on June 2nd for our next Empower Procurement webinar in this series, focusing on tools, which is the final segment of the roles, rules, and tools framework relating to institutional procurement. Also, I'd like to invite you to check out our website, which is empowerprocurement.com, and contact us if you want to enroll in one of our other procurement initiatives. Thank you all. Have a great day.